Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, welcome to Club E. Our discussion today is legalized sports betting, the next big sports trend. Our panel of experts will bring perspectives and insights from the business, legal, and political world. Everyone here is working in or on this industry, so we're lucky to have such a seasoned group, despite the relative infancy of this market. Before we get to today's discussion, I'd like to thank our Club E sponsors. Irish Titan is a web development and e-commerce company. I have Darren Lynch here kind of in the middle, and then we have the special Irish Titan table in the back corner over there. Welcome, Irish Titan folks. And Boulay is a CPA and advisory firm. Highland Bank is a local family-owned community bank. Withrop and Weinstein is a general practice law firm. And the Network Connect is a catalytic gateway for connecting investors, companies, and service providers. Dick Summerstead is in the middle there. Dick and I partner on the Network Connect. Please remember, to the extent that you can, to RSVP online for these events. You can connect through the website clube.com, where there's a newsletter that you can sign up for. We also have a LinkedIn group. The cards on your table can tell you more about that. Minneapolis Club has been our sponsor since day one. We now have been doing this for 12 years. This is the end of the 12th season. For anybody who's interested in the Minneapolis Club, please let me know. They being the Minneapolis Club, started an investment group that actually just kicked off today at breakfast. So if anybody had an interest in doing that, this is Club E, E being short for entrepreneur. If anybody was interested in the investment group going on here, let me know. We also have Lessons from the Garage, a series of video podcasts with over 200 titles and a library that's growing by the week. It's kind of like Netflix for business owners and entrepreneurs trying to grow their companies. Johnny, where's Johnny? Johnny's here. Johnny can tell you more about Lessons from the Garage, as can Dick from the Network Connect. And then the shameless plug, okay, I have to admit, I got a bunch of my family members over here. Aww. Son, 2 daughters, father, got kind of the whole clan going. And then even worse than what I just did, which is my 2 daughters, amazing students and great GPAs and this and that, are both looking for internships or summer employment. So anybody wants, up and coming folks, you got 2 wonderful students there. All right, so that's Olivia and Victoria. Make my life easier if you hired them, so please do. All right, so next couple of events. June 19th is Club E in St. Paul. Sticky Note Simple Sales. John Arms is going to be doing that. Chum Struvy's at the middle table. She runs the St. Paul group. And then back here, we take a little summer break. August 28th, Club E, my group, and Upsize are doing the right staff, an HR-centric thing. All right, that gets us to today's panel, and our last edition is here, so perfect timing. Legalized sports betting, the next big thing in sports. Our panelist to my immediate left is Paul Charchian. He's president of the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association and co-owner of Fanball. Welcome, Charch. And Paul's also done a couple of other panels for me over the years, so thank you for doing another one. Pat Garofalo is a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives from Farmington, and he is the legislative figurehead for the legalization of sports betting in Minnesota and a network engineer. So today, was it a network engineering challenge or was it a state legislative challenge?
Yeah, well, it's never the network. It's always the customers.
Oh, okay. So customer problem then today. All right. Our third panelist is Tom Masterman, is the global head of publisher sales at Genius Sports, an international data marketing company in the sports betting space. And Tom and I have had an opportunity to interact a couple of times over the years. So welcome, Tom. And then Alok Sharma is an attorney at Stinson, and he specializes in complexities of sports betting laws and the fan activation side of the industry. And since we got connected through this panel, Alok, I started following him in the various channels of social media, and his work that he pushes out on this topic is amazing, and it's multiple times a day, and it's fast and furious. So anybody who's wanting to follow what's going on the legal side, you can get a lot of that from Alok. So thank you, panelists for joining us. Appreciate it very much. We have an amazing panel today relative to how young this industry. These guys have all been working on this for some time and have wonderful perspectives and backgrounds on the topic. So with that, why don't I give everybody a moment to give us their story and tell the audience about themselves. Let's start with you, Paul.
Sure. My name's Paul Charchian. I started in the fantasy sports industry in 1993, right out of college, and have stayed in it ever since. I'm the president of the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, and most fantasy companies are now expanding in some way into the legalized sports gaming space, including mine, and with our association as well. And so we're tracking very closely in all parts, business, legislative, research, and a lot of others. And I'm also a periodic host on KFAN.
Periodic. It's more than periodic.
Periodic.
Okay, periodic. All right, Pat.
Good afternoon, Patrick Garofalo. I'm serving in my 8th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I represent the district that includes the city of Farmington as well as portions of rural Dakota and Goodhue counties. I'm a nerd and I'm in politics, so I'm into computers, I'm into numbers, and a while ago when it was announced the Supreme Court was going to hear the New Jersey appellate case of legalizing sports gambling, right away I knew that 80 to 90% of the time when the Supreme Court hears an appellate case, it's because they're going to overturn it. And so I started running around saying, oh my gosh, they're going to overturn sports gambling, and no one really understood the issue or cared, so I just kind of started studying it more, being a fan of gambling, being a fan of sports, and being a fan of legislative activity. And so I quickly learned that then when the Supreme Court arguments were released in writing, I read them, and I was like, oh my goodness, they're going to overturn the ban. And I drew up some sample legislation in Minnesota and quickly learned that, again, no one understood the issue and no one cared. Then the Supreme Court overturned the ban, and now suddenly I've become a national expert on sports gambling. So it's great to be here, and it's just it's a fun issue, a lot of cool things that are going on, and happy to hear your questions as well.
Great, thanks for joining us. Tom.
How you doing? I'm Tom Masterman, and my job at Genius Sports is to bring sports content to publishers, so to bring betting content and to bring the sports books to the ESPNs and Sports Illustrateds of the world. I got into this about 20 years ago. I started doing media and digital media, and we started a data company here in town called Sports Data. About, say, 10 years ago, we got bought by Sport Radar, which is the biggest sports betting data company in the world. I left there, did some consulting, and then I joined essentially the Pepsi to the Sport Radar Coke, which is Genius Sports. So really excited to be here. I've kind of seen the convergence of the traditional media world and the sports betting world. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the next few years, so I'm really excited.
Great, thanks for being here. Alok.
Hi, my name's Alok Sharma. I'm an attorney at Stinson. Some people don't know the name of that firm. That's the old Leonard Street Dinard firm. It changed its name recently. I've been in the space for a few years. Pat Garofalo was mentioning this New Jersey case. My clients have typically been opposed to sports betting. For the last decade or so, Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, pushed through the idea that he wanted sports betting in New Jersey, specifically Atlantic City. And so, for 9 years, he litigated a case against all the leagues. And all the leagues pushed back until the Supreme Court came down last May in a 6-3 decision that said essentially the states could go forward and regulate sports betting if they wanted to on their own. Since then, we're up to 15 states, I believe, as of last week with Illinois. That number might be a bit off. And the reason why it's so fast and furious, my tweeting and my social media, is because this is really moving really quickly. I mean, it seems like every day there's a new bill, there's a new issue. I mean, this is in its infancy still. And people are going to have to figure out how to make this work 1 year after legalized sports betting.
So roughly 15 states have...
I think that's the right number.
Okay.
I want after Iowa and Illinois, the last two, I think, and Tennessee in the last 6 weeks or so.
Okay. All right, great. So why don't we now take a minute or two and have everybody kind of share their thoughts on the market and just some overview points. No particular order, or if somebody wants to go first. Otherwise...
Well, I'll go first. It's fast expanding, and there's a lot of business opportunity. And it's funny because even though this has only been legal now for 1 year, I'm already talking to people who think it's too late to get into the market and that they're already behind the curve. And I think from a much more broad standpoint, there's still a ton of room for business growth in legalized sports gambling. And while there are a bunch of early movers, and there is so much money available. I've talked to so many people that have raised significant amounts of money in the matter of just a few phone calls, because there's so many people that see this as an exploding, profitable marketplace, and it's an exciting one to raise money in, and they want to be a part of it. And if you've got a quasi-viable business plan, I think raising money in this space is extremely easy, and that's a lot of the stories I'm hearing.
Great.
There's a couple different silos to group these into. One is the businesses themselves that are taking wagers, that are line setting. Another is the sports data department in terms of providing information to either the professional leagues or to those that are taking bets. And then third is another silo of customer-facing information and analysis. And on the third side, in terms of customers, we are just beginning to scratch the surface. It's no secret that Americans are huge sports fans, and it's no secret that Americans are big fans of gambling. And you merge those two issues together, and you see there's a pretty explosive opportunity for growth there. Now, the biggest uncertainty in this area is what the regulatory structure is going to look like. We have 50 individual markets right now because of the Federal Wire Act. The flow of information is not done on a state-by-state basis. How these markets are going to be set up, the individual betting patterns of individual areas, how they're going to interact. Those who are taking bets are going to have to be more sophisticated and going through more analysis than ever before. Everything from making sure people aren't hedging in home team markets where they can actually bet on opposite sides of an issue and be guaranteed to win money, to something as more recently as the NBA championships here, the NBA finals, where Kevin Durant, one of the most prominent players in the NBA, is suffering a calf injury that is questionable when I think it's generally known that that's not accurate information. So how that information is going to get out, how these bets are going to be taking, it's still, the market is by no means in any way, shape, or form mature. And so that presents, in that time of uncertainty, it presents a lot of opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think what I can add to that is my unique perspective for the last 10 years has been working with the leagues and working with the publishers. And the reality is this has been in the works for a long, long time. So the leagues have their public, you're probably the person who wrote it for them, but their public statements about what their position is on betting. But they've actually had staff on the team, on the league level for years and years and years. On the media side, there's a director of betting content. There's a director of betting business development at all the ESPNs. And again, they don't usually announce it on LinkedIn, but every now and then you'll see someone's title and you'll see that he's had the job for a year and a half. So he had the job. He just did not announce it. So it's been kind of under wraps. But what I've seen now is this massive embracing. Everywhere you go, it's the hottest topic. Is the potential revenue and the fan engagement capabilities of sports betting.
I got two things quickly to say. Pat kind of didn't do it justice here. When we talk how big sports betting is, the American Gaming Association, which is sort of the lobbying body for casinos, estimates that the U.S. population bets about $150 billion in the black market right now for sports betting. That's all being brought now into the sunlight, hopefully.
And half of that's from Paul charging.
The losing half.
So I mean, this is a huge marketplace, and so now this marketplace is open, right? And so the question is, who gets to profit from it? On one hand, it's a very complex supply chain between the data providers, which are arguably the leagues who are selling the data to people like Tom, who's then selling the data to different distribution companies. There's a lot of hands in the cookie jar here, and the question is, how does that all work out? And some of that's going to be legislatively determined. So some of these bills you were seeing, you'll see what's called an official data mandate. So in Tennessee, for example, the bill actually requires operators to buy data from the leagues or from Tom, who the league sell it to. So that's going to be one issue we're going to see is how does that data get distributed, right? And that's going to affect the way that people operate those businesses. The other issue, obviously, that we're looking at we talked about these 50 state markets. That means if you're a team or league, you have to watch 50 markets for unusual betting trends to see if there's match fixing going on, which is something that we're also worried about, right? I mean, you have to remember, sports betting has been going on in Las Vegas for decades, right? So this really isn't a new thing, but now it's more widespread. So we're having to be able to be more conscious about that kind of activity.
Okay, great. So in terms of the layout here, I have a question for each of them individually, and then we have a number of questions that I was going to ask the group as a whole, but this was intended to be interactive, so if somebody wants to chime in, raise your hand, and I'll try to work you into the conversation. So Pat, let's start with you. Here in Minnesota, when can we expect sports betting to be legalized in Minnesota, and why hasn't it happened so far when we heard from Alok that 15 other states have already done it?
Well, I love Minnesota. It's a great place to live. It's got a lot of awesome things about it, but one of the things that we just do not do well in this state is do anything in a hurry. We add in the complexity that Minnesota has tribal gaming operations. The current compacts we have in our state, they're exclusive to tribal casinos, they pay no taxes, and they never expire. And so any efforts to expand any level of gambling, whether it's happening or not, whoever's going to be offering it is going to be there's going to be concern that you're going to reopen those compacts. And historically, gambling has been a provocative and controversial issue at the Capitol. Candidly, part of this is cultural. I have a good friend of mine who's Native American who explained it to me better than I ever could. And he said that, culturally, in Native American society, they just take longer to deliberate things, that if it's something's the right thing to do now, then it'll be the right thing to do in 3 months or a year or whenever we get to it. It'll happen when it happens. And so I think because of that situation, nothing's going to happen on sports gambling in Minnesota unless it's consensus oriented. We need to have the tribal entities on board, charitable gaming interests on board, and making sure that those stakeholders are working through on a consensus bill. And because there's bipartisan opposition, there has to be bipartisan support. And so as we saw this year, nothing happened at the legislature unless there were 3 people in a legislative tribunal deciding things for everyone else. So hopefully it's something that happens soon, but I think that the fact that Illinois has passed it, the fact that Iowa has passed it now, this does present an opportunity for us. And for Minnesotans, the #1 advantage to legalizing sports gambling, it has nothing to do with tax revenue or giving the government more money. It really is about defunding organized crime and defunding the criminal element. There's a very robust underground sports gambling market in Minnesota. They have excellent customer service. They give you, they'll extend you credit. They will come meet you. Their lines are very competitive. So it's important that as we defund that criminal element and put it into a safe, regulated environment, that's the benefit to it. And I'm hoping that as we see these projects playing out in other states, that Minnesotans, as soon as next year, we can see legislation enacted that'll allow this to happen.
Okay, great, thank you. Alok, tell us a little bit about what the sports teams, leagues, athletes think about the expansion of sports betting.
So there's this huge pot of money out there that I've previously discussed, and the question is who gets the money? So one fight that you're seeing is between the athletes themselves and the actual teams. So the NBA Players Association, the NFL Players Association, which are labor unions that have collectively bargained for certain rights, basically are saying that I'm entitled to a portion of that revenue that's derived from betting. Some of that, I don't want to get too much into legal arguments, but they basically say they want some of the money. On the other hand, you have the teams in the league saying, well, listen, this game is happening with, just the fact that it's an NBA game means it's my game, you play in that game, you don't get any money from it. So there's this battle that's coming down the road. The NFL's collective bargaining agreement is the first one up in 2021, I think, or 2020. So we'll have some insight as to what's happening there. But now remember, not all leagues or teams are created equal. The Major League Baseball, PGA, NASCAR, NHL have all come out in favor of sports betting, the NBA as well. Some sort of they would like a 50-state solution. They realize that's not the case right now. They're kind of lobbying on a state-by-state basis. The NFL hasn't really taken a public position one way or the other. They're kind of playing more in the shadows right now. And the NCAA has basically said, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But that will probably also change at some point, realistically speaking.
Okay.
I'll jump in on this because the fantasy sports industry went through this 12 years ago when the leagues and the players ganged up on us and tried to demand that we pay them royalties for stats and names and photos. And the fantasy industry had to go through a series of legal challenges, of which we ultimately prevailed, that proved that their stats and names and images are in the public domain, and what they did is accessible to anybody. If Jose Barrios pitches for seven innings and has 9 strikeouts, that's public information. He doesn't own it, and the league doesn't own it, and the team doesn't own it, but they wanted to own it because they wanted to monopolize it. And for a while, they started making demands on our industry, and they started telling every operator in the fantasy sports industry, baseball did this first, it was, we will allow you to use these players and stats, which we'd been using for free for years, if you only pay us $3 million a year. And there was no fantasy operator in the country that could do it back then, but that was the sort of demand that was coming down the road, and fortunately we prevailed, and I think ultimately, as this goes forward, that's going to be critical existing law that will be used to try to thwart anybody who tries to monopolize those stats.
Yeah, the two mechanisms are, like right now that the leagues are seeking revenues from. The first is what's called an official data mandate, which is what I discussed earlier. The leagues are selling data. They require operators to use that data. The other is what they historically called an integrity fee, which was at 1.1% of all handle, which basically no state has passed that. They have now said it's no longer an integrity fee. Let's just call it what it is, which is a royalty. And we're asking for 1/4 of 1%, which again, no state I don't think has passed an integrity fee at this point.
All right, great, thanks. Hey, Tom, sports betting is going to change how we view and consume sports. How has this changed your job and how and what you sell at Genius Sports?
Yeah, so for a long time, up until PASPA was repealed, there were 2 distinct sales to 2 distinct groups. So you would sell to sports books, and you sell them things like when the matches are happening, you give them odds suggestions, and you give them the results of the game so that they can pay out. And so that's over here. And then you'd have a media group that would sell real-time scores and play-by-play to the ESPNs of the world to engage fans, and that gets monetized with advertising primarily. Now there's this convergence of these 2 groups. The sports books want to get close to the publishers, to the media companies, because that's where the fans are. And the media companies want to get connected to the sports books because they can make way more money off of their fans on those sites through sports betting than through traditional advertising. And I think we'll talk more about affiliate programs shortly, but the sports books will pay $300-400 to acquire a sports bettor. The average amount of money you might make off of a fan on an ESPN site might be like $1 a year. So what I'm seeing is this convergence. You'll see it now. ESPN and Bleacher Report are both opening studios at Caesars. And you'll see more and more that Caesars is showing up in lots of ways on SportsCenter. So what you're going to see, I think, is just this convergence, and that's how the sale will happen of the data. It will be, with these 2 parties in mind versus separate.
Great. Paul, Tom mentioned affiliate deals. Tell us a little bit about how companies can make affiliate deals to earn money on their users.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating change in the fantasy sports space for years. When FanDuel, you guys are familiar with FanDuel and DraftKings, when all the ads and everything, in the fantasy sports space, we were getting about $100 per referral. So somebody comes from my company, Fanball, goes over to DraftKings, makes a deposit, Fanball gets $100. But the sports bettor is worth so much more money that now we're seeing affiliate deals that are in the ballpark of $300 for a deposit and an ongoing percentage of every lifetime deposit for that user. And so the money has ratcheted up so much that now that anybody who's got a customer base that is filled with our target demo of males primarily, has got an opportunity to make a ton of money, and we're seeing very lucrative affiliate deals and ones that didn't work like they used to before. You try to get a lot of cash in, and now you can make a ton of money. And if you can get a lifetime deal on a depositor, holy cow! At the beginning of this, that could be you could have revenue for 30 years, bankable revenue. So yeah, the affiliate market's it's a great spot to be in right now. Is effectively American bettors are, we're all it's all free game right now. Nobody has got an affiliation to Caesars yet, or William Hill, or MGM, or any of the other operators. If you can be the first in, that's a really valuable customer. And so there's it's America's sort of virgin betting territory, and there's all these customers, all these companies that should be and are moving to try to get their customers to activate first in these affiliate deals.
Great.
You don't want to be the 14th person trying to reach Rick Brimacombe and get him to get them to make a deposit. I want to be the first one, and I want the $300, and I want 3% of your lifetime deposits.
Well, like Charge, I'd be on the losing side of a lot of those bets. So, yes, sir.
Could you clarify the affiliate? So, are you saying, like, for example, a fantasy user that then William Hill could purchase and you gamble on William Hill's platform?
The question, if you didn't hear it in the back, is to clarifying what an affiliate. So that we probably should. That would have been good. Yeah.
I can take
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Go ahead.
So we're dealing with this right now. So we talked to all the sports books and we talked to all the media companies, and they're trying to figure out what is the right way to set this up. But so essentially, imagine you go to NBC Sports. You're in the MLB section. You're kind of reading about the games. You then see lines from Caesars, MGM, DraftKings, FanDuel, and you'll have the ability to click through, or there'll be like a banner ad running with a special offer. If you click through and then put money into FanDuel's account, FanDuel will pay $300 to preferably me, and then I split it with NBC. But that's where we're working right now. So we've modeled this out. I did it for Barstool Sports and SI and SB Nation, and these are going to be tens, if not more, millions of new revenue, just driving people. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's really to acquire. It's to acquire the sports bettor, to put money in the account. You'll pay for that.
Okay. All right. So thanks for that question. So sports betting is going to change how we traditionally view and consume sports. So tell us a little bit about that, whoever wants to chime in.
Well, I'll jump in. I think a major area where you're going to see change in the way we view it, first, there's going to be just more people viewing and for longer. Fantasy players watch twice as much televised sports as just general sports fans. Sports bettors will probably even out-index them. And one of the big ways is going to be in-game betting, which is very popular in the rest of the world. Baseball is so damn boring. But now, when I could be betting on a pitcher-hitter matchup on a play-by-play basis, what's the outcome of this going to be? Do I think it's going to be a single, a double, a home run? Will he score a run? Do I think can I bet what's going to happen this inning? Will there be a pitcher change? How many runs will be scored in this inning? All that stuff gets to be really fascinating. And a slow game like baseball, I've got something to do between pitches. So it's going to be a perfect application for many sports, especially baseball. And in-game betting you're going to see it appear on your TV. You're going to see opportunities to bet on your phone and in the middle of games. Up until now, all this focus, fantasy or betting, has all been prior to kickoff. And then once kickoff happens, it's just the game. But that's going to change, and you're going to see it reflected on your screens before very long.
And when we say screens, we mean multiple screens, right? So, for example, the Washington Capitals, or not Washington Capitals, it's the Washington Wizards, which are owned by Monumental Sports Entertainment. He's running two video feeds, right? So the first video feed is what you would traditionally see. You turn on the TV on TNT or whatever it is. It's the basketball game. You go to a second affiliate feed, and it's got live betting data on the screen. So literally, you could be sitting at home or you could be sitting at the arena, and you're watching the second feed. It's another way to get additional revenue, get additional people watching the game. So now, like I said, you're showing multiple feeds. It's a way to, like I said, increase viewership. And again, because you have two feeds, if you don't want to see sports betting data, you don't have to.
Right. And look, I think we're going to get a separate set of announcers for games.
You probably will.
One's going to be just Joe Buck and Troy Aikman like we have now, and another one's going to be people that are only talking about the sports betting implications of every play as the games are going on.
Yeah, so the Philadelphia Regional Sports, the NBC Regional Sports Network that has the Philadelphia 76ers actually has this as well. And we were meeting with NBC, they showed us it. So it's that they do have separate announcers. They have a separate desk. These are local sports betting personalities. They just take the video feed of the action, but they use the sports betting experts. And I can tell you that it's a long game to cover with just the sports betting guys talking, so I don't think that's going to play out very well, because just after a while you're like, all right, I got it. But you are seeing this they're doing a secondary feed just try it out, but eventually it will all be merged into it'll be commonplace to have lines be discussed and things like that.
Pat, you want to add anything on that one?
I would
Oh,
just
yeah, Jay.
I was just curious, how are they going to deal with the delay? The broadcast, 7 to 10 minutes, 15-second delay.
Yeah.
New game stuff.
So if you didn't hear it, it's how do they deal with the delay? Seconds, minutes.
So this is the fascinating part, is that when this first started happening, the professional leagues, even the NBA, who was at the front of things, they were still kind of caught behind the times. And one of the first things they did is they ran over and met with the English Premier League and said, okay, what can we learn from you guys? And the big issue was this in-play betting, because there literally would be different gambling houses that would be in the arena reporting live data back to their areas. So usually what happens is you have either people in the facility or you have a dedicated feed back to the sportsbook operator who is then able to set lines so that you're not gaming the system, but at the same time frame you're not having individuals who are able to capitalize on late data.
But I think you also mean maybe the other way too, right? That the person watching the broadcast is seeing a line that's been made by somebody on venue 15 seconds before, right? So you're kind of getting misinformation too.
Yeah, his buddies at the stadium.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting because right now, not that I've done this, but you can actually go out, and if you're watching a professional sporting contest and you watch the in-game betting lines adjusting, you can see what's going to be happening next. So if you're watching a basketball game and all of a sudden the team that's favored, their margin starts going down, it's a pretty good chance that the opposing team scored on the next possession. So yes, the person at home is dealing with outdated information, but the alternative to that would be that there would be inaccurate betting lines set.
All right, so we've covered a little bit about how sports are going to be presented. What about marketed? Packaging, marketing, any kind of nuances there?
It's going to be a lot of it.
Yeah, if you didn't like DraftKings and FanDuel before, wait till you see what's coming,
If
right?
you've ever been in a hotel in London, turn on the TV at night, it's 80% sports betting ads, and then 10% ads about sports betting addiction. And then it's like 10% stuff.
Well, with all our recovery centers here in Minneapolis, we're going to be, right in line for that business.
Yeah, I mean, they still do like the kind of the drink responsibly, but then they'll do a full ad. And that's just part of like the, to have a license, you have to have a certain number of PSAs. But yeah, it's inundation is just over the top. And we're starting to see it here, but having just worked with the UK companies for a while, it is everywhere. So all the brands will start to embrace sports betting. It just will take a little time.
One thing I've learned through the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, as we've brought in all these new companies that are working in the sports gambling space, man, are they dead serious on responsible gambling. And they absolutely acknowledge the addiction. They devote a lot of funds to it. They've insisted that our association have relationships with the providers that offer various services around it. They really view, they're very serious about it, and they view it as sort of one of the core reasons that people need to pass legislation is so that there are all of these avenues for help. And when it's operating in the shadows like it is now in Minnesota, if you're a problem gambler, there aren't necessarily obvious ways to go get help because your bookie's not going to help you with that. And an offshore, some offshore site in St. Lucia is not going to help you with that.
So speaking of bookies, probably nobody in our audience here is going to do a sports book, but what are some of the adjacent businesses and business opportunities that people in the audience can participate in?
I can start that. I think the number one products you'll see are informational tools, and there's been a lot of that on the fantasy side. So these are just tools to help you understand what the betting lines mean, where are the good places to place a bet. There's a Vegas Sports Information Network, VSiN, that launched, and it's again like 24/7 sportsbook content. You saw maybe Sport Radar and this company called Sports Grid. They partnered to do a 24-hour sports betting network. There are companies like Action Network. It's just you go there and it's just a grid of information to help you place smart bets. Usually there's a free portion, and then there's a subscription, more detailed information. But everyone wants to just be an informed bettor, and it's really in everybody's best interest to have the population understand. So that's, I think, a product you're seeing a lot of.
I think you might see a lot more growth on the compliance and regulatory side too. So mobile betting is a big part of this, right? At least that's where a lot of the growth is going to happen. And because every state has different laws, you need to make sure that people are essentially geo-fenced in. So for example, there's one big company out there that's primarily doing most of the geofencing work. It's called GeoComply. And so, if you are a bettor in Tennessee, for example, in Tennessee, you can't make prop bets on NCAA games. So if you wanted to make a proposition bet on what the Tennessee Vanderbilt, who would have the first fumble in the game, you couldn't do that in Tennessee. Hypothetically speaking, let's say you cross into Atlanta or Georgia, now you can make that bet if Georgia allows for betting on NCAA. So you got to find a way to be able to make sure that people are following the laws in those states. In DC, for example, it's even down to the sports bar, right? Like we're talking about like in the building. So we're not even talking about geofencing from a signal from a cell phone tower. We're talking about Bluetooth technology. So a lot of this regulatory compliance work is going to need, these operators are going to need help because a lot of those states are having different rules and regulations. So that's definitely a growth space.
I'll throw out a couple others. Tout services, right? You should bet Tennessee +5. We're seeing a lot of growth there. There's payment processing and risk-based payment processing. It's still considered a risk area, and so the companies and the banks and the processors that are willing to take some risk have opportunity here. Customer identification is also a big one. So you have to be able to prove that you're not dealing with a minor and that this is the person, you are the person that you say you are. And so we've seen a lot of growth in know your customer companies as well. As a side note, do you guys, if you've heard sports radio and you've heard these people that are like, call my 1-800 number for the 5-star triple lock on Monday night.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard that before?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know how this works, and you know how that's kind of a scam?
Yeah, I think I do.
Do you want to know?
Yes.
So it's a bad deal, but here's how it works. Not all of them, some of them. So you run this ad on Monday on a bunch of sports talk radio stations. That is your we've got inside information on the results of tonight's Monday night game. It's our 5-star triple lock, and call our 1-800 number. So let's say 1,000 people respond. What they do is they tell half of the 1,000 one side and half of the 1,000 the other side. And now they've got your information because you called in, and they've got 500 people. And for the 500 who end up losing, on Tuesday, you're dead to us. But we got these 500 who think we know what we're doing. So then they start marketing to them the Thursday night game, the Thursday night lock. We've got it. We've got this thing figured out. So they'll take their 500 people from Monday night who are winners, and they will give half of them one side of the Thursday night game and half of them the other side of the Thursday night game. So now we got 250 people that really think we know what we're doing, and we're going to sell them our 6-star Monday night game next week because they really think that we know what we're doing. And that's the scam. They keep ratcheting up the cost and the price, and they keep winnowing down until they've got these super users who really believe they do actually have insight that they don't have. And that's how a lot of them work.
And they don't. That's the.
I think they can get away with that because you'll see these tip sites will tout if they're over, say, 51. I forget what the magic number is for being excellent.
Yeah,
but
like 54% or something.
yeah. So in reality, the top performing tip sites and products are at 54%. So that's why you can get away with it, right? Because everyone's like, you win some, you lose some. So I think that is part of the reason why that scam probably works.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be this emerging area where there's going to be a clearinghouse of who are actually the most accurate people in terms of this information, so that it's not people who after the fact make their predictions, but I mean, even that is subject to manipulation. So I'll give you a real life data example, and that is that since January 1st, I have personally a win percentage of 59%.
Wow,
This is actually,
That's really good.
not to brag. That's
good.
That's like really, really good.
It is good.
You know why? Because I've been betting on the Twins. It's not like I have some sort of proprietary algorithm or something. It's the Twins have been massively overperforming until the last 2 days. Yeah. But so that's even in that space. There's going to be the hucksters, but there's also going to be there are people who consistently above average are able to make predictions, and their analysis and their data will provide value to customers that people would be very interested in.
Yeah, there's one more area that we had talked about a little bit before we started the panel today was games that help with acquisition. So free-to-play games is another major category. And I think that a lot of normal people with normal resources could start versus like starting, something in the legal field might require more barriers to entry. But the sports books want qualified sports bettors. So anybody who's got an email list or has got any kind of users to just offer, Zynga like free-to-play games and then you get user data, you get avenue to market those guys. Then you can sell that audience essentially to one of those sports books. So you see a lot of those games coming out.
All right, so I think we're going to spend a little bit on this question. Talk about the conflict between the land-based casinos and the mobile gaming platforms, especially as we go into this kind of new phase here.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not certainly the first time this has happened. We've seen this in other industries where people make investments in a regulatory and business model that is profitable and works, and then the world comes along and kind of changes things. So right now with the land-based casinos, the focus is on getting people in the door, getting them into the food and entertainment areas, getting them to gamble. And now with this, it's kind of blowing it away. The next generation really isn't interested in gambling, with the exception of skills-based gambling. And the concept of getting in a car, driving a half hour to go somewhere and have fun is just not, the next generation is really not interested in it. And so, again, this is not the first time we've seen this in an industry. In the early 20th century, there was a very robust ice mining industry that would take ice from the northern states during the winter. They would pack them in sawdust and they'd ship them down south. And if you had a block of ice in a freezer, it's a very profitable industry. It was a very extensive industry. And then one day, someone came along and invented refrigeration. And the legacy ice mining industry didn't just sit down. They said, oh, hold on, this is dangerous. And this refrigeration, this artificial ice, how can you really trust it? And they tried using government to sort of insulate themselves from this competition. But ultimately, the technology, offered a better product at a lower price, and people chose it. And so in the area of sports gambling, the American consumer has spoken, as they have in other Western Hemisphere mature democracies, that people want to gamble on their favorite sports teams, and they want to do it from their couch. And that business model is not aligned with the infrastructure-based, we have a physical building model. And so at some point here, the customer is going to impose on the legacy industries a solution, and that solution is going to be to branch off into the mobile sphere. What it looks like, how it's going to be designed, that remains to be seen. But clearly, if you go to a casino, not that I do unless I'm in Vegas, but I mean, if you look at the casinos, it's a very old environment. The products are 10, 15 years old, and as things transition to mobile, that's going to be the only way these industries are going to be able to survive.
A really great statistic that I always point to, New Jersey was one of the first, like I said, one of the first states to have legalized sports betting. They have mobile sports betting in New Jersey. I want to say gross handle, which is the total amount of bets that have come in. That's what I mean by handle. It's different from revenue, which is a statistic that gets mixed up a lot. Gross handle that comes on New Jersey is around $350 million a month, and I think over 90% of that.
Wait a second, a month?
A month.
Okay, just to make sure
Yeah.
everybody heard, because that
So
was fast. $350 million a month.
Yeah, and I think Vegas sees about around 500. So it's pretty close, right, in terms of like market. Am I off a little off?
Yeah, I don't want to correct you on that because it's not nice to correct people in public when
No,
they're
no,
wrong. But
I could be wrong.
no, so what happened is when New Jersey went live, it was like a couple months before the NFL season, and then New York did not have a market, so you tapped into that.
Right.
So they actually achieved in 1 month $1 billion in handle during the NFL season.
Yep.
And so handle, again, that's the amount of wagers. It's not profit. That's just the amount of bets that came in. Now that'll taper off, when the NFL season's over. But when September rolls around and you got NFL and college football, which are the most highly wagered on sports in America, you're going to see that blossom quite a bit.
But the majority of that is coming through mobile betting, right? So if you
Yep,
compare
yep.
states like Mississippi or Rhode Island that don't have that robust mobile betting market,
Correct.
huge drop off in revenue.
Yep, but the last numbers I saw were like 68 or 70% of the sports bets are coming in New Jersey via mobile. So clearly, that is where the movement, the inertia, it's where the customer wants to go. And again, if the market doesn't respond, there are numerous underground illegal markets that will allow you to bet mobile, bet via a mobile app on your phone, even in Minnesota. I don't get a referral code or else.
Well, he does 58% win percentage, so 1-800 PAT is going to be coming this fall.
My triple lock for the night. Call me.
Yeah.
So if gambling is illegal, sports gambling is illegal in Minnesota, how does a company like DraftKings, how are they able to operate here?
Okay,
So
so
what happens-
the question, if you didn't hear it in the back, was with sports betting not legal here in Minnesota, how does DraftKings and FanDuel and such
So there's two different silos here. One is the fantasy sports arena. The other one is the sports gambling part. The sports gambling part, they have, earlier was mentioned like GeoComply, where when you're on your phone, they can measure down to the point within feet of where you are at. So the moment you cross a state border, it no longer works. People say, oh, well, can't you hack it? Can't you? No, you can't. These guys are, I mean, to the point that there's a term called jailbreaking your phone, if anyone's familiar with that. If you jailbreak your phone, even if you're in the right state, they won't let you use the application. So that's the sports gambling side. On the fantasy sports side, there's sort of a regulatory uncertainty, for example, in the state of Minnesota, where we base it off of federal law, and we think the federal law says it's legal, so they're allowed to actually have fantasy sports in Minnesota. Each state is being different, but so if you use the DraftKings app, you're doing that in Minnesota, that's totally legal. We're trying to get a regulatory structure in Minnesota to provide some basic frameworks for it, but the absence of legislation is a default of allowing it to be legal. Is that how you'd say it, Paul?
That's 100% right.
It's a legal distinction too. Fantasy sports versus sports betting, right? Sports betting, you're betting on spread and things like that. Fantasy sports, it's a skill-based game where you take players, right? And
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. Fantasy sports, we contend and it is a skill-based game, whereas sports gambling is gambling.
Interesting story. Iowa, until recently, fantasy sports was actually illegal there.
There was.
If you went down to the rest stop on the other side of the border on I-35 between Minnesota and Iowa, you would see people on Sundays who would drive up to the rest stop to put their daily fantasy lineups in, and then drive back. It's a steady stream of people. Now things have changed. Iowa has legalized sports gambling.
And fantasy.
And fantasy, yes. And so you're going to see, particularly on college football and NFL weekends, a steady stream of people going down I-35 to Diamond Joe's Casino, just on the other side of the border. And it's kind of a lost opportunity for our state if we don't move.
So are we going to move?
Gosh, I hope so. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I'm passionate about the issue. It's not because I want more tax revenue, but just because, defunding organized crime, getting basic consumer protections in place, having our law enforcement officers focus on more important things, that's just smart government. And Minnesota, it's a great state, but we're a really expensive state with our government, and our government needs to be more smart.
Okay. All right. So, is it a quick question or a big long one?
It's a quick question.
Okay.
Which sport for in-game betting, which sport do you think is most likely to see that proliferate to be first available?
So the question in the back, if you didn't hear it, is for in-game betting, which sport is going to be most active?
Yes. No, it's just because of the pure volume of the superiority of college football and professional football, that would be my estimate of where you're most likely to see it.
We don't know, but I think hockey and basketball are really harder because they're fluid games with, especially
stopping.
basketball, lots of scoring, fluid game, not a lot of stops. Baseball's got nothing but stops, almost no action. That's easy. Soccer's got almost no scoring. Football's got lots of breaks, frequent commercial breaks, timeouts. Lots of opportunities to get on your phone and rewager. So I think basketball is going to be the hardest out of that group personally.
Okay, so we have a handful of minutes. We're kind of getting towards the finish line here. Two questions. Think of it kind of like lightning round, so short answers. But what was the aha moment that you saw something happen and you just says, oh my gosh, this is going to be a big deal, this whole sports betting trend? Was there something where the light bulb, went from off to on?
In 2011, Commissioner Bettman, I think, is the NHL commissioner, said sports betting would cause irreparable harm. In July of last year, they were the first league to sign an official data deal for sports betting. So that was the light bulb for me.
Commissioner Silver of the NBA, when he came out about 3 years ago and formally flipped the NBA's stance on sports betting, was really, really big. And it was the first league that just dealt with it openly and said, we're gonna support it legally for all the reasons Pat said, and that changed a lot of the momentum.
I think the Silver stuff. It was publicized so much. Like he only spoke a few times, but it was just used again and again and again. And he's always been kind of seen as the commissioner with the most foresight.
Yeah.
So when you were going on sales calls, when did it switch from, hey, we got this cool data that you can package up and use for some other reason, to this data is going to drive sports betting?
I don't know if it happened overnight, but I know when we first got bought by Sport Radar, we kept our name Sports Data because we were so afraid of going to media companies and saying that we were affiliated with sports betting. And now it's the exact opposite, where all the media companies taking all my calls because of the fact that I am affiliated with sports betting. So I think whether or not that was overnight, it's just, we had to basically, change or keep our old name, and we didn't want to have any affiliation with.
And when was that acquisition?
It was in November 2013.
2013.
So we kept ourselves as sports data for a while.
So in 6 years, gone from don't want to publicize it to being the main reason why you're having the phone call.
But it's just there's a lot. I mean, there's obviously a lot of hypocrisy that I've seen over the years. But it's because people are trying to figure out what's best for them and their families, revenue-wise, and they'll say whatever I guess they have to say. But now all the conversations are moving around betting.
Okay. So as we wrap things up, closing comments, final thoughts, tidbits you want to leave the audience with, summarize what we said today.
I think the most important thing is to recognize that this is a very immature market. There's certainly Europe has done that, but the European regulatory structure, the European consumer is vastly different than the American consumer. And so a lot of this is going to be done on the fly, but it is a tremendous opportunity. We don't know where everything's going to go. We haven't even talked about the issue of the NCAA and forced amateurism on college football and college basketball and what that means in a legalized gambling environment. But going forward, this is going to be a ripple effect that's going to cause a lot of changes. It's going to mean increased engagement, increased viewership. It's going to mean a lot more money for the professional leagues. It's going to have fans more engaged with their athletes when you combine it with the social media platforms. It'll create opportunities, but it'll also create some new conflicts. And it's just important that in the state of Minnesota, our government recognize that and get in front of these items instead of letting the problems happen and then responding to them in a reactive way. We can do it in a positive and proactive way. Everyone's going to win. If we do it in a negative, reactive way, everyone's going to lose. And so I hope we choose the former rather than the latter.
Pat touched on something that I think is really important. Traditional sports betting was just like Vikings plus 5 points. And that was the Nevada betting. But most of America was not raised on betting as much as they were fantasy sports with players. There's a whole gulf of play between fantasy that we're used to, which is player driven and stat driven, and just what's the final outcome. And there's a huge area of this hybridization of fantasy and gambling that most companies aren't touching on yet, and is a massive opportunity for creative people to figure out how to make fantasy players still feel like they're playing a fantasy game, but it's also a betting game at the same time. And right now, all anybody's trying to do is emulate Vikings plus 5. And I think we have 50 million Americans that played fantasy that would like to have something in between fantasy and gambling.
As a team and league lawyer, I see the huge revenue potential, but I also am a fan of protecting the shield. Last week, 12 La Liga players were arrested in a match-fixing scandal. My job, or one of the things I'm here to help with, is identify risks and mitigate those risks going forward, right? You were, like I said, we were used to one betting market. Now we have 50 betting markets. It's a lot easier to do. We didn't talk about college athletes, but they're the most likely to cheat because they're not getting paid. So my job, and something that I view that's important to my clients at least, is let's do this responsibly. Let's find a way to make revenue, but let's also find a way to protect the product in the field. You care that a pitch or a strike is a pitch or a strike because of the referee says it, right? Going forward, we need to make sure that continues, and we don't have some of these sort of nefarious activity going on.
I just think it's an inevitability. When you sense that people are sort of debating whether or not to do it versus when to do it or how to do it, that just blows my mind. Like this will absolutely happen. I can't imagine a state that won't legalize betting. So it's not going to destroy the fabric of society. It's going to make it. It's just going to save a lot of sports. It's going to be a new fun way to engage. There'll be a bell curve of usage. Will there be abstinence and addicts? But most people will be in the middle, just like when they go to a Twins game. Some people have 14 beers, not me, and some have none. But most people, engage in things that they shouldn't do to excess, and they don't. They do it in a normal way, and it's fun, and it's part of what makes the game enjoyable. And I think betting will fit right in there with hot dogs, beer, and whatever else people enjoy besides just watching the game.
All right. Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Let's give the panel a round of applause.